Hey, welcome to Socialism for All. Today's date is August 26, 2021, and in this video we're going to take a look back to almost a year ago when Bernie Sanders laid out his plan to hold Biden accountable in the first 100 days of the presidency. We're going to see how that turned out. If you like this video, please click like and subscribe, and consider supporting us on Patreon. There's a link to Patreon in the video description. So just before we start the video, our relationship with Bernie Sanders is we supported him in 2015. I gave him money. Actually, I had a good job at the time. I gave him a couple $100 in the 2016 primary effort because I thought that the messaging he was putting out, as far as the way that he was reaching people and stirring people to want more out of society and government, and just imagining a better world, albeit within a fairly limited framework. Anyway, he was reaching masses of people. Here was a guy who was getting invited onto cable shows and actually denouncing most of the existing features of the U.S. as it was. It seemed like a giant step forward. Yes, obviously we could improve on it, but to me it was like, after suffering through the Bush years and then the Obama years, it was like people were just in a coma. And, you know, that comes out of people feeling like it's not that people don't want things to change or that there's, you know, nothing going on in people's heads. But when people don't feel like things can change, then people don't do anything. And then for somebody interested in promoting Marxism, you know, if people feel like nothing at all can change, then you can't work with that as well as an activist. So it seemed like Bernie, although, you know, he was not a, Lenin or even a Eugene Debs, he was definitely getting people up and thinking, and I saw other people on the far left, like me, actually making some headway. So it seemed promising. That was until he blew his moment in 2016 by not starting something more independent, just being like, okay, I lost to Hillary, they cheated us, but whatever. We're going to start another party and run in the midterms in 2018, and then we'll see you in 2020 again. That would have been great. The guy was filling stadiums. It was a prime opportunity that I don't know that anybody has had for like 50 years. So we need an independent left. He totally pissed away a chance to do that in favor of funneling people into the Democratic Party. It's the task of the U.S. left right now to break with the Democratic Party. That was a great opportunity to do it, you know, a few million at a time. And again, he pissed it away and sold people out to a Democratic Party, which will never change, ever. And he knows that as well as anybody. He used to talk about it in the early 90s. So there's Bernie Sanders. And then, of course, he did the same thing again in 2019, 2020, except even worse. He didn't even stick out the whole primary, and just in the middle of a pandemic when the Biden people were telling everybody to go vote, even though it was not safe at all, Bernie just laid down, really without much protest over that, and just really handed it to Biden. It's not like he laid down and, oh, we're going to redo the election later. No. It went to Biden. I mean, it defaulted to him. So he laid down the resistance, and then all the cable shows for like 24 hours were like, Bernie Sanders, wow, inspirational figure. And then immediately right after that, they buried our platform. You know, all those things people want, like Medicare for all. Of course, as a Marxist, these are just, you know, initial reforms. We want socialism, and ultimately that's going to have to come from outside of the system. But yeah, it was at least being discussed, and that was the point. From a morale point of view, you want people thinking that something is possible. In fact, the net result of the Bernie campaign, I kind of worry, had the opposite effect. Although things are getting so desperate now, conditions-wise, that it may not matter anyway. People did get a taste for a while of like, hey, I imagined my life without all this hardship, and I want that, and I'm going to find it Bernie Sanders or not. So hopefully at least that was people's takeaway. I know it was mine. But Bernie Sanders here in this interview from about 10, 11 months ago was part of the Joe Biden machine. He was the hood ornament in charge of outreach or some honorary position that they gave him. And he is, in this interview, going to explain to Crystal Ball what he was going to do to hold Biden accountable for the first 100 days. Of course, we'll see what he says specifically, but Biden hasn't done. I mean, he ran on a mask mandate. That hasn't happened. That would be the simplest thing. People are talking about vaccine mandates. Let's start with a mask mandate, which would cut down transmission dramatically. Get the vaccine, obviously, it's going to cut down your symptoms. But masks, even for the people who don't end up getting the vaccines, it's at least going to contain the germs somewhat. If everyone wears masks, we know that transmission and exposure goes way down. That's like a no-brainer. Biden didn't do it. I mean, he had public option on his website, hasn't mentioned it once. So let's see what, the great Bernie Sanders has to say about this whole thing that he signed his name to.
With the election in less than 2 weeks, what will candidate Joe Biden's final pitch be, and how will progressives seek to hold a potential Biden administration accountable? Joining me now to discuss is a man you might recognize, former presidential candidate, Senator Bernie Sanders. Welcome back, sir.
Great to be with you, Crystal.
Absolutely. So I actually wanted to start with the stimulus negotiations happening right now in the Senate and with the House and the White House. I know back when it was the CARES Act, you urged pragmatism. You said, listen, this isn't a bill that has everything that I want in it, but people need help, so let's move forward with this. Do you think that Democrats should embrace the $1.8 trillion package that Mnuchin and the White House have put forward?
Well, it's not just a number, 1.8 or 2.2 or whatever it is. It is what is in the bill. And I am concerned about a slush fund that the Trump administration would have within that bill. I am very concerned that when we have millions of people who have lost their jobs, they desperately need that $600 supplement to their unemployment. They need that $1,200 check. They need health care. They need to be able to pay their rent. So the devil is in the details in terms of what is in the bill. But I will also tell you, I think it is really pathetic that you have Mitch McConnell, who today is saying, well, I and 20 other Republicans, we don't want to go forward with anything substantive. We're not going to do it.
Yeah, I think that's correct. Just to push you a little bit on that. So what is in the deal, as far as we understand it, is instead of the $600 unemployment plus up, it would be $400. It would be another round of checks. That corporate liability shield that Republicans have been very anxious to get is in there. I guess the concern is, do you think that after the election, there will be another opportunity to get a big stimulus like this? You already have Republicans dragging their heels, especially in the Senate, while there is a lot for them to benefit electorally from passing aid to Americans. That, as you know, you've got 8 million Americans who have slipped into poverty since the end of the CARES Act. You've got rent piling up, bills piling up, utility bills, electric as we head into winter. How can we get help to people?
And on it goes. Crystal, all that
Before Bernie gets to that part of the answer, I just want to comment quickly. They haven't gotten to the Biden thing yet. Just that smile at the beginning of it that he was doing, like, I just don't know how this guy lives with himself. It just looks so uncomfortable being in the position that he's in, especially when you listen to just some of the things that he's said in the past. This just doesn't track at all with that. I mean, he's in the big leagues here, obviously, and is finally getting some recognition for some of the work that he did. This is like the definition of selling out, though. Anyway, so he's talking about wanting people to still get the $600 extra a week that was being given to people as part of the pandemic benefits. There was, for anyone not familiar, there was kind of like a base of $150 to $200 that was being given. That was the PUA benefits. And then there was an extra $600 a week, the PEUC. That expired, I think, at the end of July last year. It was either the end of July or the end of August. The net result was the last 5 months of 2020, people were just getting that $150 or $200 a week. And that was, during the shutdown and everything, that's what people had to live on. And there was, I think some talk from Nancy Pelosi that they didn't want Trump to get any of the credit. And it was basically like, basically the definition of terrorism is when you harm a civilian population to try to influence the government. Nancy Pelosi was talking about withholding benefits from people to like make them angrier at Trump or something. But it was nuts. And yeah, there were things in those bills that were odious from the Republicans, like corporate liability for people getting sick and things like that. But also, you let people go without benefits for 5 months. I remember being really angry about that last year. And of course, now we're in a situation again where it's end of the summer and benefits are about to expire again, except this time it's all the benefits. And look at that curve of COVID cases. COVID's out of control, and they're just ending the benefits. That eviction moratorium is ended now, and we're at a time where the pandemic is about as bad as it's ever been. Yes, if you get a vaccine, your symptoms are less likely to go into the severe zone, but it still happens. There are breakthrough cases, and people do still end up in the hospitals. Plus, half the country hasn't gotten the vaccine, some of which has been for Republican-encouraged right-wing political reasons, and some of it is just poor and working people being underserved. There's either not clinics readily available in their area, or they don't know how to access them, or they are not used to getting medical care at all because that is not a universal thing in this country, and they're just unfamiliar and uncomfortable with the whole process. And then there's deeper mistrust over centuries of abuse, particularly of people of color. So, we're not in a good place. Those benefits are expiring again. So this is pretty much a replay of last year, I would say, just with the vaccine, although also COVID is worse because now it's Delta, not the original strain. So anyway, Bernie made passing mention also of Mitch McConnell. You just wonder how a guy like that gets reelected, but Bernie goes out there and makes these pitches and says, the Republicans do X, Y, Z. They still get, reelected somehow. Anyway, for another time, I guess. But let's get back to the video, and maybe Bernie will get into some more details about, Biden and what he expected to change in 2021.
Is that if the Democrats gain control over the Senate, the first order of business will be a massive stimulus bill to protect desperate working people throughout this country. We have seen just the other day in New York City, 1.5 million people are struggling to put food on the table. This is obscene. First order of business for a Democratic Senate will be to protect the working class of this country with a very, very strong stimulus bill.
But Senator, do you think that people can wait that long?
Well, no. I would like to see a bill passed today. As you know, the House of Representatives passed the HEROES Act over 5 months ago. And all that McConnell has to do is to allow us to vote and give us some support for that bill, and we can go a long way to addressing the crises facing working families.
Yeah. Let's turn now to the presidential race. Obviously, the election is less than 2 weeks away now. What's your message to the young people, many of whom supported you, who, they don't like Donald Trump. They hear, the rhetoric and they see the threat that he poses to the country, but they're reluctant to vote for a candidate in Joe Biden who, frankly, supported the Iraq War, who helped author the crime bill, who still supports the bad trade deals like NAFTA and TPP that have sent our jobs overseas. What is your affirmative case for Joe Biden to those young voters who are still skeptical?
Well, the affirmative case is severalfold. First of all, Trump must be defeated because we're not just talking about Trump's bad policies. We're talking about a literal threat to American democracy. You got a president who does not believe in the rule of law, who has suggested that he may not even leave office if he loses the election. Trump must be defeated, end of discussion. And if you care about climate change, if you care about racial justice, if you care about ending sexism, you got to vote for Joe Biden.
Why? So this takes me back. I remember doing a long video criticizing Vosh, repugnant leftist quote-unquote YouTuber. I guess he thinks he's a socialist, where he did a video trying to shore up some support for voting Joe Biden from Marxist theory. And it was all these same arguments. Climate change, the threat to democracy, etc. First of all, this isn't democracy. Go look up the Princeton study on democracy. It was a political science study that showed there is no statistical relationship between public opinion and public policy. There is a strong relationship between capitalist opinion and public policy. The rich people who control both the Democratic and Republican parties, control them through their funding and participation, they have their opinions reflected. But as far as, one person, one vote, that isn't how public policy is set in the United States. So get that out of your head. I don't really know also what is worth fighting for in the system when the Democratic and Republican Party have been working together for a very long time. They collaborate. Basically, the issue here is it's capitalism. The capitalist class does what the capitalist class wants. And although there are disagreements among different factions of capitalists every so often, the biggest disagreement between capitalists is still far, 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 far smaller than the disagreements between us and the capitalists. So as long as they both of those parties have power, and that goes for, honestly, the libertarians are just too small. They have a very similar ideology to neoliberalism. They just want to deregulate everything. So, whether it's the problem here again is capitalism and the interests of the capitalist class. You have to look at the class dynamics, not just political parties. So anyway, Bernie was talking about, we have to get people to 600 a week again. Well, when Biden got in, that got cut down to 300 a week. And we all remember, hopefully, the fiasco over the $2,000 checks that were promised. There were billboards about it in Georgia after Biden was elected. And that got cut down to $1,400 checks. And Biden, the Democrats tried to pass it off as, oh, well, we already gave you one check for 600. Yeah, that was before the 2,000 came out of your mouth, though, and that wasn't part of the deal, and that wasn't what was on the billboard, for example. Finally, Bernie started out here by talking about, well, okay, let me talk about the affirmative case for Joe Biden. Trump. That's not the affirmative case for Joe Biden. That is the passive case for Joe Biden, is that his opponent is awful. And again, there were other people in the race. Obviously, U.S. politics doesn't even consider that. So anyway, this has been a really bad year. That's what I'm getting out of all of this sort of check-in with 10 or 11 months ago. Continuing.
Second of all, if you look at Biden's economic proposals, they're not Bernie Sanders' proposals. Don't want to suggest they are, but they will raise the minimum wage to $15 an hour.
Oh, yeah. No, so about that $15 an hour, that was bullshit because the Democrats let two of their own, Kyrsten Sinema and Joe Manchin, block that. And there were no consequences for them. There were no repercussions. And just the other day, we put up a video about Kyrsten Sinema back at it again, trying to block Bernie's most recent bill. So this is bullshit. This is a party, again, that will never change. Trying to take over the Democratic Party is a failed strategy, which, it's not a terrible thing to make a mistake and fail and learn from it and move on and do something different next time, which you think might be more successful. It's another thing to claim to be a leader and to keep leading people back into the same predictable mistake over and over and over again. Case in point, continuing.
Equal pay for equal work, making it easier for workers to join unions, $2 trillion investment in combating climate change and creating millions of good-paying jobs in energy efficiency and sustainable energy.
I'm just going to jump in here again real quick. Bernie's really rattling stuff off as he got, very fluent in doing over the course of running for president twice in 2015 and on. Where is this stuff? I assume some of this is in the $3.5 trillion infrastructure plan.
Paid family and medical leave, no small things. Third point that I would make, Joe Biden is not going to become the dictator. He is the president of the United States. If we rally the American people and demand that Congress stand up and fight for workers and have the courage to take on the big money interests in the insurance industry, in the pharmaceutical industry, in the fossil fuel industry, in the prison industrial complex. You know what? We can transform this country.
Okay, key word in that was if. Okay, have you been doing that? Because by my watch, it's 8/26/2021. That hasn't been happening as far as I can tell. In fact, there were Medicare for All rallies just in the past month. Was the Democratic Party involved in that even? This is not something your party supports, Bernie, and stop telling people that they do. Now, they are talking about passing some kind of infrastructure bill, so something is going to happen. What winds up being in that bill, though, is very much a question at this point. If memory serves, I think that Bernie's bill, the $3.5 trillion infrastructure proposal, is 7 times bigger than the $500 billion proposal that is being, the counter proposal. So we'll see what actually ends up happening. But the thing is, yes, people rallying and protesting for things can result in change. It can. But you're not even doing that. And also at this point, if we're going to rally for things, let's rally for the whole thing, the whole deal. To use a super boomer phrase, the whole enchilada. I mean, honestly, if you're going to get out in the streets, aim fucking higher than this.
But if Trump is reelected, all we're going to be on for the next 4 years is defensive procedures.
I've said this before. I think the Democratic Party winds up looking better when they're on the defensive, because when they're in power, they fucking fall on their face every time and they make themselves look terrible. They're better off just remaining critics of the Republican Party. And in that case, they have to play at actually trying to rein in some of the stuff. When they're in power, it's like, we're living through it right now. By the way, this is by no means an endorsement of the Republican Party. I propose a 10,000-year moratorium on voting Republican. Don't support that party. They're terrible. But trying to see the Democrats as somehow not their partners. That's really the problem, is they both are in the same boat here. They have to at least pretend when they're in opposition. And they kind of stop pretending. Again, where does all this go? It's just like when Bernie Sanders, took himself out of the race. It just vanishes from the conversation. Continuing.
I want to get on the offensive. And that is why, in my view, every progressive, every person in this country who thinks for 2 minutes about what's at stake should be voting for Joe Biden.
So let's talk about what that would look like under a potential Biden administration, because this is something that I've heard from you and a lot of others. Okay, we're going to have an opportunity to push Joe Biden to the left. What does that specifically look like in practice? What would some of the red lines be for you? And if he falls short in your measure in terms of fighting for working class citizens of this country, would you be open to supporting a primary challenge either against him or against Senator Harris in 2024? Okay,
so I got to say, just logically speaking, those are good questions. Democrats are much better liars and they're better promise makers than they are actual, saviors, than they are at actually delivering on what they lie about and promise. All the smoke that they blow up your ass and all the things they tell you they're going to give you. When they get into power, that's where the problem begins usually. Crystal Ball just asked about, the pushing Biden left thing. And it's a very good question. I think that this is a, pivotal moment in the conversation per Bernie's 100-day plan to hold Biden accountable. Because what we've seen in practice is that the we're going to push Biden left people actually wound up defending him against criticism. Has Biden been pushed left so far? No. He's pulled others right. Because again, it's just the same old song. It's, oh, the Republicans are so mean and we got to do this, and don't over criticize him. Don't criticize Hillary. You're going to spoil her for the it's just, it never ends. It is a never-ending refrain. It's like being in a dysfunctional family, for anyone who has experienced that, where you are just constantly in this tension of non-accountability and power dynamics gone foul and abuse. And that's what this is. It's just constant manipulation. It's really, really obvious, and it's just so harmful to the people who are still caught in the web of manipulation and lies. And that's what this is. It's the Democrats purport to be the party of change and the party of working people. You know, there was a point when the labor movement had exerted some kind of influence and gained some amount of position within the Democratic Party. That time, and even that was, produced mild results. That time is so long gone. I cannot stress that enough. I mean, it's just, forget it. It's gone. You have two now neoliberal cults, the Democratic Party and the Republican Party, both of whom support the basic same agenda, just fighting with each other over who has more zombies in their army. And it's just this pointless conflict in terms of producing any social change. There's a great point to it in terms of keeping people distracted, but neither one of these parties does anything for people. And of course, the same, as I mentioned before, goes for libertarians who support the same ideology. They're like a reserve party that the capitalists can draw on as needed. But yeah, this is just empty. This is hot air from Bernie Sanders.
Those are great questions, Crystal. Let me start off by saying that I don't think the progressives within the Congress can do it alone. So the first point that has to be made, and I'm going to make this over and over again, if you want a progressive agenda to come out of the United States Congress, we're going to have to rally the American people by the tens of millions to demand that we have a government that represents all of us and not just wealthy campaign contributors. We're going to have to correct and deal with a very corrupt election system with massive voter suppression that exists every single day right now. Second of all, what we are going to do is I'm going to lay out a 100-day agenda which speaks to the need to begin the process of moving toward Medicare for all. My legislation, 4-year legislation, first year lower the eligibility age from 65 to 55 and cover all the kids. I'm going to introduce that bill. Immediately, we're going to raise that minimum wage to $15 an hour, equal pay for equal work. Immediately, a massive infrastructure program to rebuild our crumbling infrastructure and create millions of good-paying jobs. Immediately, making it easier for workers to join unions, et cetera, et cetera. So we have got to lay out an agenda that speaks to the struggles and the desperation of working class Americans. And finally, tell the corporate elite they have had their day. And we are going to stand up and fight for policies that workers desperately need.
Okay, and my response to that is, nice speech, you fucking asshole. Because I'm waiting. So a big word that he kept stressing there was immediately. We're going to have a 100-day plan for Medicare for all. I haven't even heard about this again. We're going to raise that minimum wage. No, you haven't. We discussed that previously. Massive infrastructure program. Okay, it's been introduced now, and they want to actually do an infrastructure plan that is 1/7 that size. Easier to join unions. This would be something like card check, which the Democrats have been talking about since there was a need for it. What is card check? Well, the basic process of getting a union going in your workplace, the standard process if you're not doing something informal like a solidarity union or a minority union, is if you want union representation, you get workers to sign A cards, authorization cards that say, my name here, authorize this union to bargain on my behalf. Okay? And then in your collective bargaining unit, the proposed bargaining unit, whether it's your department or your floor or whatever it is within the operation, you get a certain percentage of people to sign those cards. And if you can get at least 30% showing interest, that is enough legally, this is how the law works, to trigger the National Labor Relations Board to come in and hold a union election. And then if when they hold the election, usually like 6 to 8 weeks later, a lot can happen then if you get 50% plus one of the workers in that proposed collective bargaining unit agreeing and voting for the union, then you get union representation. The idea of card check is if you get 50% plus one rather than the 30% right up front, then it obviates the need for an election. You don't have to hold one because they say, well, if the election was held today, you have 50% plus one. So we don't need to hold an election. We already see that there's a majority. So that's card check. It eliminates the need to have a union election. And why is that important? Well, it's important because in that 6 to 8 weeks that it takes the NLRB to come in and hold that union election, which they supervise, the employer always uses those 2 months to terrorize all the union activists, to scare people off of the union, to lie about the union, oftentimes to make threats about, even though this is not permitted under U.S. labor law, they often do it, to make threats about, oh, we'll close the company if you do this, or, they just make all kinds of threats. And that's very effective, actually, at whittling away a significant amount of double-digit support. This is why larger unions have a set policy where, forget 30% A cards, they often want you to get 70% A cards because they know in that month and a half or 2 months that between the A card gathering and the election actually being held, they know the employer is going to drive off like 20% of the support at least. And you can read story after story. Actually, right here on the channel, we did a long audiobook on Borders, the old Borders bookstore that used to be. There was a big union drive there, and you can read all about it there, actually from Borders' point of view, but they admit to a lot of the stuff. It was a leaked internal corporate memo, basically, telling Borders managers how to be more effective union busters. Check that out. So yeah, we need card check. It's part of the reason why there are so few labor unions in the U.S. A majority of workers say that they would join a union if there was one in their workplace. But in practice, we have under 10%, nowhere near 50 or 60% actual unionization. How many workplaces are actually unionized? And that's because of the way that the law is set up, that it favors employers so much. And if you try to start a union, even though it's illegal and you can win back pay eventually, there's decent chances you're going to get fired in the meantime. So anyway, yeah, card check would be great. What would be even better, Democrats have been talking about this for forever, and how about doing something about it? Really, honestly, getting card check would be a huge step forward. It would be really good. Unions are not automatically socialist. A lot of unions just believe like, oh yeah, let the capitalists have their power. We just need, a fair wage. Well, no, we need to totally move away from that system and take away the capitalist power. But labor unions have long been a good forum for socialists to do organizing. You just have to watch out for opportunism and class collaborationism. Anyway, so Bernie says we can't do it alone. If you want a progressive agenda, people got to rally for it. I hear crickets here. Actually, the few times that people do the rallies, like I mentioned, are the Democrats even involved in that? And then there are some issues with, for example, collaborating with DSA. People often ask, hey, Socialism for All, what do you suggest? I've never been a member of anything before. I usually steer them towards the Green Party or DSA because they're widely found, they're not a fringe group, and you're probably less likely to run into like insane drama or cult-like behavior. But that said, the politics are not as good. So DSA, for example, there are many good Marxists in DSA. There's also lots of really shitty social democrats who have really bad positions on, for example, foreign policy. And they have a very, like, for example, they'll call Venezuela authoritarian. And like, we can't support Venezuela. This winds up just supporting imperialism in the end. So how are you going to call yourself socialist and then basically take imperialist positions like that? that, if you changed your position, you could help targets of U.S. sanctions and things like that. But no. You wind up actually giving support to the U.S. sanctions, or at least not opposing them, because authoritarianism. These people don't know what they're talking about. They're just capitalists at best. So there is a problem there in the left. And again, Bernie Sanders, could be a thought leader on this. Of course, he has a lot of those same ideological problems himself. But we could have people, putting their foot down in DSA and being like, hey, the bullshit stops today. We are adopting an actually socialist platform. And maybe that will happen someday. But, I tell people there is good non-electoral work with practical effects in poor and working people's lives you can get involved with and do something, like rent control measures or something like that. DSA does run some worthwhile campaigns, but half of the organization is in bed with the Democratic Party, and as an organization, they wind up endorsing a lot of Democrats. So that's a problem. I would say if you get involved with DSA, you should become a militant against involvement with the Democratic Party. Reject that entirely and try to take the organization in an actually socialist direction. You'll have opposition, and that party is full of Democratic bootlickers, but this is the reality of fighting for politics. It's not easy, and you will have opposition. So just because there's opposition doesn't mean necessarily that you shouldn't try. Also you got to pick your battles. So, you can't just be like, I'm going to join the Republicans and pull them left. Like, let's have realistic goals here. But, also that said, you're going to encounter resistance and fakery wherever you go. Even in purportedly Marxist organizations, which are seemingly, harder line Marxists, you're still going to get people in those organizations. I mean, the history of socialism shows this. Look at some of the struggles that Lenin had with revisionism. So anyway, this is Bernie's plan for immediately. We're coming into September next week, and, what do we got? What do we have? We have expiring benefits, and we have yawning uncertainty stretching before us like an abyss. What is going to happen? COVID's out of control, and we're just supposed to go back to work. I was just reading a story the other day, I think I retweeted it on Twitter, Socialism S4A, about how crematoria need extra refrigerators because literally the bodies are just piling up and they can't even burn them fast enough. That's where we're at. Continuing.
I want to make sure I'm understanding you here.
Am I prepared to support primary challenges all across this country to those members of Congress, Democrats, who are not prepared to move toward a progressive agenda? You're damn right I am.
And so let me make sure I understand what you're saying here. You're saying, look, the Biden administration, they'll have their 100-day plan, but there's going to be a Bernie Sanders working class 100-day plan as well that you're going to attempt to rally people behind.
You got it.
Does anyone remember this? I don't remember this. What I do remember happening back in January is force the vote and the squad. I mean, the people who are the, quote, progressives in Congress being put on the spot to be like, hey, let's do this. And I still haven't heard anything from it. And it's not unfair to say, I mean, that was January. Bernie Sanders is talking about the first 100 days plan. I have not heard a single thing about this since. I didn't even know he had announced this. There's no trace of it as far as I'm aware. Please correct me in the comments if there was something about this and I missed it somehow. But do you remember this? I don't. In fact, I remember progressives being put on the spot to do more about pushing for Medicare for all, and pretty much everyone saying now's not the time. Well, where was Bernie Sanders during that whole experience? This is just straight up bullshit as far as my memory serves. Like I said, please correct me in the comments, but this is the first I'm hearing about any of this, and that is definitely not what happened in January, February, March, and April.
Got it.
That's exactly what we're going to do. And I think the plan that we're talking about, our opponents, my opponents say we're radical. We're not radical. We're finally going to address the long ignored crises facing working families, where half of our people before the pandemic were living paycheck to paycheck. 90 million Americans have no health insurance or are underinsured, and we have massive income and wealth inequality. The American people want action. They do not want us to go back to business as usual. 87-point programs taken over a 12-year period. We got to move, and we got to move aggressively.
Wow. So this interview is a prime illustration of how Democrats talk before an election, and now you can compare it to what has happened after the election and what they've actually done. This is Bernie Sanders pumping people up and pumping people up, and then Biden gets in and literally immediately crickets, total silence. Like I said, he put some things into that $3.5 trillion bill that may get cut down to like a tenth of its size, who knows. But we're talking now about September. Everything is expiring or has expired already. And this is just a stark contrast. All this momentum, Joe-mentia, what has it amounted to? They rolled out vaccines. Okay, Biden, happened to benefit from the timing of that. And then they pissed it away by telling people to go mask off back in mid-May. This enabled Delta to spread to where it is right now. And this is where we're at. I've taken to calling Bernie Sanders Bernie Milk Carton Sanders because it's like, where has he been? I know he just dropped this bill recently, but prior to that, it was business as usual. Joe's slogan was back to normal. I mean, that's as close to business as usual as you're going to get in a slogan. This is pure, unadulterated crap. Again, how Democrats talk before an election versus after. And one last thing, Bernie Sanders was not a Democrat for a long time. I mean, he technically still is an independent, but functionally he is a Democrat now. I mean, when he came into this whole thing, it did look potentially like, here comes this outsider who's going to make some waves. Well, we're now heading into September in the Joe Biden presidency. What have we got? We got one round of Trump, and now we're starting into Biden and Harris, and things are just getting worse with each passing year. So this has not resulted in the change that we've been looking for.
Yeah. And Senator Sanders, you have been traveling the country. You've been working very hard, campaigning very hard for former Vice President Joe Biden to get him elected. What are you hearing from people? And also, has this time period with the pandemic and the economic fallout from that pandemic and the soaring inequality that we've seen associated with all of that, has it changed your view in any way about the policy prescriptions and the size and scope of the challenge and what's required right now?
Look, right now, the working class of this country is facing more desperation than it has since the Great Depression. And what also troubles me is not just the reality of economic desperation, hunger, unemployment, low-income workers, people without health care. What troubles me is that so many people have given up on the political process, are so alienated from the political process that they believe incredibly crazy conspiracy theories. So when I talk about an agenda that speaks to the needs of working families, it's not just economic, it's not just racial justice, it's not just climate change. It is making people all over this country understand that we hear their pain, that in a democratic society, government has the capability of responding to their needs, to explain to them why the rich are getting richer, why large corporations are able to throw Americans out on the street and move to low-wage countries. But this moment is not only a moment in which we deal with the economic crisis, we have got to deal with the existential crisis of so many of our people giving up on their government and giving up on democracy.
Yeah, well, insofar as the democracy that Bernie is talking about is actually capitalism and the kind of democracy, quote unquote, that brings, which is not democracy at all, then yeah, I'm here to help you give up on that because it's a dead end. Here at this channel, we teach Marxism-Leninism, which explains you will not get real change through this system. That doesn't mean you never run candidates. Sometimes that can be helpful in counting your numbers, and maybe even if you elect people, showing that the system is unwilling to do reforms. However, that's not the angle that Bernie Sanders is pushing here. And incidentally, people even today debate the usefulness of that. I mean, is it even useful for counting your numbers when they don't hold real elections in the fucking first place? I mean, that actually may just work against you because it then becomes falsely representative of how many people are actually supporting socialism. If you run a socialist candidate and it gets 0.3% of the vote, that actually just looks bad, but it's actually a result of, this whole process that isn't actually representative. So anyway, Bernie Sanders is not wrong about the desperation. But come on, we hear their pain. This is Bill Clinton stuff. I feel your pain. That was a bad Bill Clinton. But anyway, yeah, Bill Clinton felt our pain, and then he fucked us with a cigar and then lied about it. So that's where we're at again. History repeats itself, and Bernie Sanders is just shilling for a party that's going to fuck you over. I know I sound like a broken record on that, but look at how hard this guy is stumping for bullshit. And then again, compare it to the results. This is what was promised. This is what, this is what you want. This is what you get. Case in point. All right. And then as far as this thing he says about alienation from the political process resulting in believing in conspiracy theories, what did that even tie into at all? I have no idea what he was talking about there. He didn't elaborate that on all. Actually, funny enough, the last video I put up on the channel was a pamphlet, an audiobook and discussion of a pamphlet called How to Overthrow the Illuminati, a Marxist alternative to Illuminati conspiracy theories and things like that. And they do talk about alienation and not understanding that it is in fact capital, which we're projecting all these, it's the lizard men or the shapeshifters or the, Illuminati or whatever. No, it's capital. It's this thing that is dominating our lives. And there's real solutions to dealing with that don't involve, that kind of conspiracy theory thinking. I have no idea what he's talking about here. So Bernie Sanders makes this half-hearted gesture to say, oh, people are really suffering. We should care about that. And then you back the party that's not going to do that. So you're in the wrong party at best here. And at worst, you know exactly what you're doing. And, you're just using your brand to sell people misery. Prove me wrong if I'm wrong, but I think it's time to move on from all this bullshit. This is, like I mentioned before, abusive family dynamics. You have the abusers, you have the apologists. It's all a big warped, distorted web of manipulations. Continuing.
Yeah, I think that's well said. Senator, you're probably familiar with my political beliefs, very, much aligned with your view of the country and what needs to be done. And so as I've been looking at the moves that the Biden campaign and potential Biden administration are making, looking for signs of, what direction they would potentially go in, I've seen some frankly troubling things. One of the news reports that just came out from Politico laid out the number of Republicans that are being vetted for that administration, people who are quite extreme in terms of their economic views, like John Kasich, like former Senator Jeff Flake, like Meg Whitman. And yet, is there a single person who endorsed you or is aligned with your vision who's being vetted or considered for a Biden administration? If not, why not?
All right, Crystal, you're going to forgive me for not, going too much into the details on this.
Wow, what a bullshit answer. That's a perfectly fair and logical question. The premise of that question is entirely valid. And look how Bernie treats it. Throws it away. Laughs at it smugly. Sorry.
The answer to your question is, yes, there are. But the main point that I would make.
Wait a minute. Before the main point you would make, you said, yes, there are. Who? Do they have names?
Is that some of my friends in the Democratic establishment are not aware, or I think cannot comprehend what some of us have in mind in terms of what will happen after Biden is elected, hopefully after he's elected. And that is, we are not going back to business as usual.
Yeah, so again, I have to laugh at this. That's so far exactly what's happened. We're coming up on a year from when this was recorded, and that's so far exactly what's happened. It has been business as usual. Either Bernie is deluding himself, or he's lying to you in the audience. Don't take this. Don't take it.
There's too much pain out there. There's too much inequality out there. There's too much injustice out there. And here is what I believe from the bottom of my heart. If the Democrats, with a Democratic president, Democratic House, and Democratic Senate, cannot begin to address the real crises facing this country, then the future of this nation will be very, very dismal indeed. The people are giving us an opportunity now, and if we blow it by not being bold and aggressive, the next Trump who comes along will be even worse than this one. So this is a moment to restore faith in the American people, in their government, and I'm going to do everything I can to fight for an agenda by which they're saying, well, you know what? It looks like the United States government is finally listening to us. They're no longer ignoring us. That is what we have got to do.
This is just too funny, too sad listening to this. I mean, there is one way that Bernie Sanders can redeem all of this. I'm going to lay it out for you right now. Is that 3 years into the Biden presidency, he says, he holds a big press conference, draws a lot of attention, and is just like, for the last, 10 years, I have been telling people that their faith in this government and this system that it represents and organizes and manages can and should be restored. Well, guess what? Nothing changed. Don't have faith in this system. The next time an Obama comes along and tells you to have hope, tell him to go fuck himself. And we need Marxism-Leninism. That's like literally the only way he can save this, is by having all these people that he's leading into the jaws of the Democratic Party and just tell them, attack. That is, and by the way, I don't think he's going to do that, but that would be just, logically speaking, the only way to turn all this bullshit into something positive, is to say to all these people like, look, I led you down the path of trying to reform an unreformable institution. You've seen where it's gotten us. Now attack. I mean, that's literally the only way. But again, that's not going to happen. He's going to fade off into nothingness, still saying, we can change this party. It's just, that's, I think, how he's going to go down. And unfortunately, a lot of people are going to go down with him. Don't be one of those people. Don't go down with this ship. It's like if you're on the Titanic when it hit the iceberg and people are like, hey, I think we hit an iceberg and the ship is sinking. We got to do something. And Bernie Sanders comes out, I have faith in the captain of this ship and he's going to do the right thing. And it's like, Bernie, while you were talking, the ship just sank another 3 feet. We have a serious problem. We must restore faith in the ship. Like, that's what's going on here. Stop wasting your time. Bernie Sanders is wasting your time. The Democratic Party is actually doing worse than wasting your time. They're taking your time, energy, and money if you're contributing to that party, and they're actively using it against you.
The polls have Joe Biden up significantly nationally. They give him an edge in all the major battleground states. I actually was just looking at a Quinnipiac poll that has him tied even in a place like Texas. How realistic do you think that some of those stretch states like Texas or Iowa are for the Biden campaign? And what's your sense generally of how this election is going and what we can expect?
Crystal, I'm not much into political speculation. I'm just working hard and doing the best that I can do, and we'll see what happens on election night. Texas, to me, is an interesting state, and we have now done 3 events virtual events in Texas. And I think Texas has the capability of being a transformative state for American politics. Because as you know, historically, because of massive voter suppression in Texas, they continuously have one of the lowest voter turnouts of any state in the country. That's beginning to change. People are getting registered to vote, the Latino population, the young people, African-American community getting more involved in the political process. We are supporting three great progressive candidates for Congress in Texas. Each of them has a shot to win if the turnout is high. So we're putting a lot of effort into Texas. And if Texas does go for Biden, clearly the election will be over. It will be a landslide victory. In terms of other states, I mean, what we're seeing is polling which suggests that races are within the margin of error. We will see what happens. But all I can say to the viewers is do not become overly confident. That's the worst thing you could do. Do everything you can, not only to vote, but to bring out 3 of your friends, 5 of your friends, and make sure they vote as well. I have the feeling this will be, in many states, a very close election.
And finally, Senator, last question to you. And I ask this not as, looking back and woulda, coulda, shoulda, but as a way of learning lessons to build successful progressive movements and campaigns moving forward. There have been 1,000 postmortems of your campaign, and I think people feel particularly heartbroken right now looking at the economic pain, looking at the fallout, and understanding that you had that large-scale vision that could have really addressed working people's concerns, especially right now in this moment. Is there anything that you would do differently going back and thinking about the campaign? Any missteps, any regrets that you have in that regard? Again, as a way of sort of building and learning lessons for the future.
Crystal, very good question. Let's have that discussion after Election Day. How's that?
All right. I will look forward to that. Senator Sanders, thank you very much for your time today.
Thank you.
All right. And there's the music. Not too much there in that last clip, but I wanted to play it out to make sure I didn't miss anything. As far as the Texas and whatever, anyway, just not a lot was said. I have to hand it to Crystal Ball. Those are very smart questions. I think that she conducted the interview extremely well. Just a very talented person, I think, when it comes to this kind of political interviewing. Unfortunately, her politics, shifting away from Bernie Sanders to conclude, tend to lie more in the class collaborationist populist realm. That's what she, on her newer show with Kyle Kulinski of Secular Talk, basically promote. They'll talk about social democracy and populism. And these are not ways out of capitalism at all. They're ways to wind up getting manipulated by capitalists. So, why do people support things like that? Usually when it can be, propaganda makes them fear going there, and being in the public realm and advocating for actual socialism. That's not popular. It's a good way still today to get blacklisted, obviously. But, a lot of times socialist politics are really just not in the financial interests of somebody who is upper middle class, better off, has some stocks, has some capital, and not 1 or 2 stocks, but, a significant portfolio. And they really don't want to see the system change. They might, think that, capitalism with a human face or, more kind-hearted capitalism like social democracy should be implemented. These people fundamentally don't understand the nature of imperialism, the role of the U.S. as a military power within imperialism, which is a global system. They don't understand how the social democracy of Franklin Delano Roosevelt and the New Deal came to pass. It came out of militant struggle by socialists, communists, anarchists, actual radicals against capital. That's where it came from. And also just the threat of the existence of the Soviet Union. Capitalists were under pressure to do something here in the U.S. and in Western Europe and anywhere else in the advanced capitalist world. They didn't want that revolution spreading, so they tried to buy off their people. Similar efforts going on today. So again, this is, a Marxist against populism, against social democracy. I think that there are times on a Medicare for all, we can maybe rally behind some of those things. They make sense either from an advanced capitalist or a socialist point of view. But bottom line, social democracy does not come out of thin air. It comes out of co-opting struggles by actual socialists. So on that note, I'm going to leave it there. Bernie Sanders is full of shit. The Democrats still failing to deliver anything of real consequence that meets the moment. They are the party of the bare minimum, and oftentimes not even that. You know, the party of we're not Trump, we're not Bush, whatever it is. This is a dead end. And if you want a better world, you know, it is not getting better on its own. Obviously, you don't need me to tell you that. These are not ways out, and we need higher standards in our politics. This means a learning Marxism, which has been an actual way that poor and working people have fought their way out of capitalism, and that is what you have to do. You have to fight your way out of it, not attach yourself to the tail end of a bourgeois party like the Democrats and, you know, get dragged along. That's the Bernie Sanders approach. It's a losing approach. Don't be a loser. We need all of us in this together to win it. We need you. Please get involved. Thanks for listening, and thanks to the current patrons whose names are on the screen. All of those contributions are very encouraging and very much appreciated. But whether you're a patron or not, thank you for whatever it is you do to oppose capital and to promote socialism both online and in your community. Thanks again, and we'll catch you in the next video.